Hello, friends. We are excited that our No Small Endeavor Plus community is growing. Now, all of our friends in the No Small Endeavor orbit are intelligent, smarter than average, winsome, good-looking, while the members of NSE Plus seem especially so because they are enjoying ad-free episodes as well as special subscriber-only content once a month where we discuss habits and practices learned from our guests over the years. And those special episodes have been a lot of fun, personal and practical. I love sitting down with our producer, Jacob Lewis, and recording those for you. And so we would love to have you join us. And your NSC Plus membership helps support the show. So because of all of these things, we'd love for you to join the NSC Plus family. Just go to nosmallendeavor.com, click subscribe, and start catching up on our subscriber-only episodes today. Again, go now, nosmallendeavor.com, click subscribe, and start catching up. See you there. Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp. You're listening to one of our best of episodes on No Small Endeavor. This with Reverend James Lawson. And I think truly one of our best of episodes that we re-release here in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday. A beautiful story of Dr. Lawson and his nonviolence, his theorizing about nonviolence and all of the stories and narrative of his life that led him to those convictions. Hope you enjoy. I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
At age 4, I tried to fight a 4-year-old white neighbor boy who suddenly started spitting at me racist words.
This is civil rights leader Reverend James Lawson.
My dad's position was that we had to defend ourselves, and my mother's position was they can do it another way.
Today we talk with one whom many see as the very conscience of the American civil rights movement, one whom Dr. King called the leading theorist and strategist of nonviolence in the world.
We started the public desegregation of the nation, and we did it without hating anybody.
All coming right up. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. In early 2023, I was on sabbatical from my day job as a professor of theology and ethics. The sabbatical allowed me to make a bucket list of potential guests for our show, people who have been heroes of mine in some way or the other, stellar examples of courageous pursuits of living a good life. One at the top of the list was Reverend James Lawson, whom many have seen as the heart and soul of the American civil rights movement. He's now 95 years old, a beautiful and vigorous 95 years old, his mind still ranging widely over what appears to be an encyclopedic memory. Before making my way to visit with him in person in Los Angeles, I combed through boxes and boxes of Reverend Lawson's papers, letters, photographs, newspaper clippings, telegrams, journals, and more, all housed in the Vanderbilt University Special Collections here in Nashville. We met in Los Angeles in the parlor of the church he served in the latter part of his career, Holman United Methodist Church. Normally I sit with a guest for an hour, 90 minutes at the most. I was moved to get to sit with him at all, but after almost 2.5 hours he was willing to keep going, but I thought I'd be greedy to go on any longer. His stories were moving, intimate, and revealing, including his stories of his friendship with the one he simply calls Martin King. And along the way, he prefaced a number of things with the refrain, "No historians know this," or "The books get this wrong." He is, without any doubt in my mind, an insufficiently sung legend. All of us here at No Small Endeavor are deeply honored to share this conversation with Reverend James Lawson. Reverend James Lawson is a Methodist minister, seen by many as the teacher of many of the American civil rights activists, the very conscience of the movement itself. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once called him the leading theorist and strategist of nonviolence in the world. He was born the grandson and son of Methodist ministers. Reverend Lawson served 14 months in prison as a conscientious objector to the Korean conflict. After gaining parole, he served as a missionary in India. And then back in the States, when Dr. King met Lawson in 1955, he pleaded with him to come to the South. Lawson would respond to King's call and begin a lifetime's work of participation in the civil rights movement, as well as serving Holman United Methodist Church in Los Angeles for 25 years, where we sit today in the parlor of the church. Reverend Lawson, it's an honor to be with you today.
Why, thank you.
I once heard you, I think, in Nashville, speak of the influence that your mother had on forming your thinking about nonviolence early on. Do I remember that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Yeah. What did that look like for you?
When I was 4 years old, my father was appointed to the St. James AME Zion Church in Massillon, Ohio. It is in that congregation that I clearly felt, along with my parents and my older sisters, who I was and that what my life was about. And as I've looked back, it was 4 years old when I sensed the call of God. At age 4, I tried to fight a 4-year-old white neighbor boy who suddenly started spitting at me racist words. In family conversation, my dad's position was that we had to defend ourselves, and my mother's position was, no, Jacob, they can do it another way. And I heard such conversations probably before I started school at age 5. The whole family would be gathered around the supper table, for example, getting ready for supper. So that table talk was in our house before I started school.
And then did your mother once confront you after a fight you had later?
Yes. It was a beautiful spring day, sun shining, just wonderful Ohio spring day. And my mother said, Jimmy, I have a errand for you, because I was the errand boy very often for my mother and father. So she gave me whatever it was I was to do. I ran out the back kitchen door. As I turned left onto Main Street, there was a car parked immediately close to the corner. The windows wide open, and a youngster, I think it was a boy, but I don't remember, was in the front seat. And as I turned the corner, he stood up in the seat and put his whole shoulders outside the window and yelled at me a racist epithet. And I simply went over to him and smacked him and went about my business. I ran on back home. And as I reported to my mother about the errand, I, for some reason, sat in a favorite chair by the back door in the kitchen while she was hunched over the stove, cooking supper, no doubt, to my left. And I talked to her about my day, and one of the things I reported was hitting this child in the car. And my mother, without turning towards me, the first thing she said to me as I related this incident was, Jimmy, what good did that do? And then she went into what I later call a long soliloquy on who we were, what we were about as a family, and about our worship of God and our participation at the St. James AME Zion congregation, and our religion and Jesus. That meant we could not be injured by this misbehavior of being called something racist. And she ended up by saying, there must be a better way. That incident was a continuously transforming incident for me, it became a numinous experience for me because I heard a voice which came from what it seemed to me a deep place in space. And then gradually I felt that it was coming from inside me, but from outside me, but it was coming to me, and it was a voice deep within. That voice said, number one, you will never again fight anybody physically. I heard her voice continuing as that issue came to me. And then secondly, as she was talking, I heard the same voice saying, and you will find the better way. Now, this is 4th grade. And so from then on, I never slapped or threw my fist at somebody or tackled anybody in anger over any kind of an epithet, and not over a racist epithet. So actually, my understanding of nonviolence began at least there.
So then in your college days, I understand you began to read Gandhi, Tolstoy, and you're also grappling with the question of nonviolence and thinking about Scripture and thinking about your faith.
Well, some of the scriptures that had worked out well. I already recognized that Jesus was not somebody condoning violence of any kind or hatred of any kind, because I was reading the Bible and before school even. It is in my first year in college in 1947 that the history department brought in A.J. Musty, the executive director of the FOR, for a lecture.
The FOR is the Fellowship of Reconciliation, founded in 1915 by 68 pacifists, perhaps one of the largest, oldest interfaith peace and justice organizations in the United States. Lawson would subsequently serve in the FOR and be involved in its work for many years.
Musty did talk about pacifism and nonviolence and Gandhi. And he's the one, therefore, that introduced me clearly to the Gandhi. And I went to the library and began to read every book I could find on Gandhi.
And then you're also, during this time, if I remember correctly, trying to discern what you would do in the face of the draft. And maybe are you talking to your local draft board?
Our Selective Service Act required every 18-year-old boy to register. So I registered that September, but I indicated that I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, that I was shaping and forming my life around the call of God in Jesus, and that I hadn't really made up my mind where that process wanted me to operate. So I was registering, but could not know what direction the prayer life and the meditation and the reading would take me.
Yeah.
47, I enter college. I've registered. And then I sent my draft cards back. I have come to the conclusion that, like Jim Crow law, which I've refused to obey, selective service law was a second unjust law, which I could not obey.
If you check out the unabridged podcast version of this episode, you can get the full story here, but let me summarize. Lawson could have gotten out of the draft for the Korean War in 3 different ways. He could have gotten an exemption as a student in pre-ministerial training, and as a conscientious objector. But he had come to the conclusion that the draft itself was unjust as Jim Crow laws. So rather than take the easy way out through one of the exemptions, he told his draft board that he was a draft resistor. And then he didn't flee the country. He just told them that he would not be showing up for the draft because of his conscience. And then he went on about his life as a student until the FBI showed up to arrest him. He was tried. He was found guilty. You're sentenced to, I think, 36 months in federal prison.
That's right, 3 years. I was given a 3-year sentence. And I spent my first night in jail or somewhere in Dayton, Ohio, and ended up at Mill Point, West Virginia, which is a federal prison.
I remember I read in some of your papers, some of your diaries from your year there, 13, 14 months in the prison. And one thing that particularly caught my attention, you were, 23 years old at this time, or quite young?
Yeah, I was 21 or 22.
Okay. So I was struck by, here you are in prison, and in your diary, there's an element of this sort of deep sense of you're not so sure yet that you've surrendered yourself to God. And this sort of sense of maybe I've failed God, or maybe I haven't found the path yet. And yet at the same time, here you have enough confidence to have done what you've done to resist the draft and end up in prison. But do you remember that kind of sense of inner struggle that you had?
Sure.
What was that like for you? Would you talk about that a little bit?
Well, now, you need to understand, in the Christian Bible, hearing a call from God through Jesus, follow me, that is a highly inside piece of work. And I've always recognized my flaws as a human being. Dorothy Lawson may tell you I don't recognize some of them, but I've tried to recognize my flaws and to not pretend about it. So a journey like that, which is a transformative process, from my perspective, simply tries to prevent pretending that you've achieved. You're on a journey, and you continue to be on a journey. And maybe that journey never ends.
When you think back to those 13, 14 months in prison from this perspective now, late in your life, what did that experience mean for you in your development as a human being?
In many ways, I lost my fear of persecution. I lost my fear of getting hurt in the struggles. In just any number of ways, I learned the inward confidence of seeking to follow the true and the beautiful and the righteous. But as I put it back then all the time and still continue to put that mantra ahead, I learned the benefits of seeking to follow Jesus. So that at 94, there is a kind of a profound sense of living in the presence of the eternal, and a profound sense of responsibility to continue to love and care about life, care about people, and to resist. I more often put it nowadays that I must resist the spiritual forces of wickedness, which in the United States I teach is the inside and the outside of racism, sexism, violence, and plantation capitalism. I've come to the conclusion that these are the four major principalities that the Bible talks of that I know to be exactly that. They hurt the United States bitterly, and the United States does not recognize it. And because they've been spread by Western civilization, they hurt the world.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with American civil rights leader James Lawson. We love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in this episode, as well as a PDF of my complete interview notes and a full transcript. We would be delighted if you'd tell your friends about No Small Endeavor and invite them to join us on the podcast. It helps extend the reach of the beauty, truth, and goodness we're seeking to sow in the world. Coming up, Reverend James Lawson and I discuss his travels to India, his appointment as Secretary of the Fellowship of Reconciliation in the South, and meeting the Little Rock Nine. Hey there, quick favor. We're conducting an audience survey. We would be really grateful if you could take just a few minutes and answer our survey. Please visit survey.prx.org/no-small-endeavor. That's survey.prx.org/no-small-endeavor. Would love it if you'd go take that survey today. Thanks. So you're paroled and then spend some time as a missionary in India. I presume in India you continue to learn about Gandhi?
Yes, I mean, that's what excited me, because then when I went to India, I had the privilege of meeting a number of the folk in the independence movement. This is 1953 when I arrived there. I had the privilege of meeting Gandhi's right-hand man, Jawaharlal Nehru. I also had conversations with a number of Christians who were in the movement, in the independence movement. And made it my point to visit with them. I visited a couple of Gandhi's ashrams, especially one outside of Nagpur in Wardha. So India was a terrific choice for me. I have on my desk today a book that I continue to review by Gandhi that I bought in India.
And then it's there that you hear about the movement beginning with Martin Luther King?
By the time of 1952, I graduated after prison. I was not thinking of teaching in university or anything like that. I was strictly aiming at the pastorate and dealing with racism. So by 1952, I was convinced out of my Gandhi studies that we black folk could have a massive movement of nonviolence that would shake and change the nation.
And so how did you discover about what was happening in the States when you're in India?
I subscribed to a number of magazines that got there late, came by ship. But I read Newsweek magazine, Progressive magazine. I read Nation magazine. I think I read Christian Century in India. They all got there 6 weeks late, but that's how I kept up.
Yeah. Any particular memory of what it was like when you first heard that the movement was starting in the States?
Yes, I was elated. I hollered and jumped and danced around my desk. I was so, that's one of my days that I will never forget. My next door apartment neighbor was a biologist by the name of Christopher Theophilus. Chris came running out of his house and knocked on my door to ask me what in the world was going on. I told him, I've been expecting this to happen. When I go back home, I will be in that struggle.
So you come back to the States, and I think you're perhaps back in the Midwest.
In Ohio, I go back to Ohio and start my graduate work at Oberlin.
In time, you're invited to come to the South to begin working in the movement there?
My going to Nashville was not because I was recruited. It was because I had committed myself to, as soon as possible, get into the South to work with Martin King and the movement.
Mm.
I did that before King happened.
Mm. Mm.
I was going to go to Atlanta, but when when I called AJ and told AJ, I'm dropping out of school to go south, I'm going to move to Atlanta, he said to me, make no plans about the South until we have talked again, until I called you back.
Hmm.
So when he calls me back, he said, why don't you become secretary of FOR for our southern region?
Hmm.
And of course, I'm self-financing myself.
Right.
So I know that's God's will.
Yes.
I know that's providential that I can move south with the job.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But my first big operation as Southern Secretary was in Little Rock.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's left out of the story.
Yeah. So what happened in Little Rock?
Glenn Smiley is our field director. He meets me in Nashville. He has arranged an apartment for me, and he has arranged an early schedule. So January and February, I'm traveling with Glenn and his wife at places where they have worked, where he has worked, where there are FOR members. Mm. There is a need for nonviolent education and counseling. So the first place we go to is Little Rock. My first day in Little Rock, I meet all 9 of the Little Rock students in the living room of Daisy Bates, who was the chairman of the NAACP state chapter. Glenn and I are together. We sit with those 9 students, which have been arranged by local people. FOR members at the School of Medicine arranged it. Mm. I asked them right off, what is going on? What are you experiencing? They are experiencing the full assault of the governor, the White Citizens Council, and approximately 100 white students, the names that the NAACP has locally. They've kept the name. All the people who did harassment, they named them and reported it to the Southern Court. I asked them, what are your experiences? They tell us at length. How are you handling it? They said the lawyers and the NAACP and our parents tell us we may not fight back. And there is some anger in me that happens, that's what's going on. And I then eat all my anger up inside, and I say to them, what they actually mean is, you are not to fight back like you are being attacked. You are not to hate as your enemies in the school and the governor hates you. I said, you are to fight back with character. And then Glenn and I introduced them to nonviolence. And they're all baptized people. So we can use Jesus as the model. And one of the very exciting stories that came out of L.A. for me was, I asked them what was the worst thing happening to them. And a couple of the girls immediately popped up and saying, the bombing. And I said, well, what is that? They said, well, almost always a boy will take a piece of silver or a piece of white paper, and they will wrap it in a marble or a small stone, and then they will hurl that at us in class. And it really hurts when it hits. So I said, well, what can you do about bombing? You can't stop them from bombing you, and you can't go after them for bombing. You know that. So what are some of the possibilities? And so we walked around that bombing. It was in that first week, and I think it was Carlotta Walls, but I'm not sure about who it was, one of the 9, who said that when she went to her 8 o'clock class the next morning, as she entered the room, a bomb went past her head, missing her, hit the wall, and fell to the floor. And she said that she looked at it. She was very aware where it came from, the boy, towards the back of the room. And she thought about it. And she said, with my knees trembling, I stooped down, I pick it up. And I walked back to the boy who threw it, and I put it on his desk and stared at him and smiled at him. She said he turned all kinds of colors. Then she said, the next morning, he was at the door when she entered, and he said, good morning. He never again harassed any of us.
What a beautiful story. You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with civil rights leader James Lawson. If you missed a portion of this interview or would like to have access to the complete unabridged version, you can follow our podcast wherever you listen. We're going to take a short break, but coming right up, we discuss Reverend James Lawson's time with Martin Luther King Jr. the day he was assassinated. Hey friend, if you didn't know, I started a newsletter a while back that comes out every 2 weeks. I've been delighted to hear from so many of you about positive response to the newsletter. We call it the No Small Endeavor Notebook, where I riff on themes and topics related to our podcast, giving you additional material for thinking and doing in your own quest to make sense of what it might mean to live a good life. Join us by going now to nosmallendeavor.com and sign up there. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com to sign up now for our free No Small Endeavor Notebook newsletter. We pick back up here discussing Reverend Lawson's leadership in the Nashville sit-in movement, which sought to desegregate lunch counters and became a model for desegregating business districts throughout the United States. So when you began to send out groups of students to do the sit-in, I wondered what sorts of levels of anxiety are you dealing with personally as you are watching these young people that you've trained go out into these hostile situations?
I think the major anxiety they had was, will it work? They knew about the possibility they would be hit, could get hurt. But one of the big gains of the nation was we showed the nation that democracy can make changes without firing a shot, without killing anybody, without beating up on anybody. Because the great task from Nashville is that we started the public desegregation of the nation. And we did it without hating anybody.
Yeah. Yes.
We bombed no store. We killed no police officer. We chased no white boy down the street. And that's almost not written anywhere.
You moved to Memphis in what year?
1962.
When the time was right, Reverend Lawson called Dr. King and asked him to come to Memphis. He arrived April 3, 1968. That afternoon brought a thunderstorm, a Memphis deluge, so great that Dr. King considered not going to the Bishop Charles Mason Temple, where the mass meeting was scheduled, thinking no one would be there. Upon realizing that hundreds, thousands had already arrived, he made his way to the venue. In his speech that night, which some have described as especially emotional, he recounted his life and labors in the movement, how grateful he was for the work he'd been given to do. Near the end of the speech, he told of the occasion he had been stabbed and nearly died. The tip of the knife had come so close to his aorta that the New York Times reported that if he had merely sneezed, he would have died. Dr. King then recounted how a young girl, a ninth grade student, a little white girl, had written him a letter to tell him that she was just so happy that he did not sneeze. And he recounted how happy he was too that he had not sneezed, for it would have kept him from seeing the wonders in Nashville, Birmingham, Albany, Selma, Washington, D.C., and he wouldn't have been there that night in Memphis. And then he closed, referring to the rumors and threats that were out and about, but that he didn't really care, because he said, "I've been to the mountaintop." He said he wouldn't mind living a long life. Longevity has its place, he said, but he knew that he might not get that, and he just wanted to do God's will, and that he was not afraid, not fearing any man, that his eyes had seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And exhausted at the end of the speech, it was as if he fell back into the arms of his friends. Less than 24 hours later, Dr. King was assassinated, standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel there in Memphis. When you think back to Dr. King's assassination there in Memphis, what are memories that stand out for you in that 24-hour period?
April the 4th, 1968. I have to tell you that my friend Martin and I were very much like each other. We had read the same books at Morehouse, Baldwin Wallace, and Boston. We had some of the same people teach us at Boston when I finished up at Boston. We were third-generation pastors. Martin and I simply clicked, and part of the reason we clicked is that by 1952, I knew we were going to have a movement. I did not know who was going to emerge, but I saw as whoever was going to emerge was going to be my Moses, and that's the word I used to myself in India and before and after. So I'm doing a memoir. I do not know how many times King and I conferred by phone. I do not know how many times King and I took walks at Penn Center or in Georgia, at our staff retreats, our board retreats, when he and I would take walks for the purpose of talking. And his, in large measure, sharing with me where he thought things were and wanting me to bounce against it so that he could feel that he was moving in the right direction. I can't tell you how often that happened.
Yeah.
When the sanitation strike began, I canceled going to see him in Miami, where he had called and wanted me to do some nonviolent lectures for preachers he had brought in to try to help them understand nonviolent struggle. I canceled and told him that we're going to run the strike like a nonviolent movement, and that he would be getting word from me because I would want him to come into a mass meeting. We were in court April the 4th. So I was somewhat upset because I had to be a witness in the case against SCLC, being in Memphis, that morning. And Martin insisted that Andrew Young and I, who were to be the witnesses in the federal court, would come by before we went to court. We talked in that morning, and when I asked for the court to let me go, it was after lunch, around 2 o'clock or so. I then went back to where King was at the motel and visited with him about the movement until maybe 5 o'clock, and then went to the strike office to see what things I had to do for the next steps. Then landed at home around 6 o'clock because Dorothy and I had a discipline that I would always be home at 6 o'clock no matter what was going on. And we would have supper on the table with, by that time, 3 sons. And so a little before 6, I was walking into the kitchen, greeting her, and then heard from an alcove the TV interrupted by an announcement that King had been shot. So that tells you my history, a piece of it that day. But I spent probably close to 4 hours with King at the motel before the court opened, and then spent probably close to the same amount of time or more with King after I left court.
In your papers, there were, I don't know how many, telegrams from all over the country, the world, to you, expressing solidarity with you and sympathy to you, and letters expressing grief, some expressing shame. There was one telegram from the Lawyers Constitutional Defense Committee of the ACLU that they had sent identical wires to the White House, SCLC, Andrew Young, and to you. You had a copy of it. And I was struck by the language of pain and anger in this telegram particularly. It said, "His death leaves us despairing, all but paralyzed with anger and bitterness at a society that destroys its best sons." And I wonder, for you being such good friends, did you have to process despair, or what was your own experience of anger or grief like during that time?
You have to understand that I am a man of the Spirit. I'm a man of the Scriptures. I'm a man who tries to follow Jesus. So that while I experience grief, I very rarely ever have experienced despair. I've had more a sense of despair even today from the 60s because my country assassinated 5 of its finest young men: a president, a senator, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, and Martin King. That is the great issue, because forces of spiritual wickedness in the United States assassinated people in order to keep the country from doing what the country should have done. Those forces are still alive. I do not just have grief for Martin. I continue to grieve because the major handicap of the assassinations of the 60s, very simple from my point of view. Number one, those assassinations killed the process of transformation that meant that Malcolm X was about to join with King. And secondly, stop the emergence of a movement that would have transformed the United States. It did some transformation anyway, but didn't do all that could have done and would have done.
As we get close to finishing up, I wonder if you could share a little bit about what sorts of disciplines, to use a word you used earlier, have continued to help you stay the course. What is it for you that has kind of helped you try to practice a vision of life that you have felt called to ever since you were that 4-year-old?
Well, the scriptures have been my primary book for the inward life, and Jesus of Nazareth has been my primary figure. And the Exodus, the first written account we have of civil disobedience, the first written account that we have of what was probably a essentially nonviolent movement of the escape of slaves from Egypt to the Promised Land, are two of the several places that I know about that have informed me over the years. Then, of course, my primary mantra is still follow Jesus. And in my reflection and prayers and Bible reading and practice of the presence that goes on now, there is a centrality to the role of the Spirit of Jesus as the highest possible form of religion that the human race knows anything about. And then there is a quiet, in-house confidence in the work I have done. What people who call me a civil rights worker do not know is that I, at a very early age, knew I was to be a pastor. As early as junior high school, the 7th grade, I realized I was on my way towards being a pastor. In high school, I was convinced I would be a pastor. So it's as a pastor I have worked, and many people are not aware of the fact that I pastored 3 congregations, and they give me today quiet joy in what how I was able to live, what I was able to do, how I was able to participate in the lives of all kinds of people from that position of a pastor.
We've been talking to Reverend James Lawson here at Holman United Methodist Church, which he served for many years in the parlor. And Reverend Lawson, we thank you for your generosity with your time, and we thank you for the beautiful example of your life and for your sharing with us today.
Thank you very much for wanting to do this, and I'm pleased I'm able to do it.
You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with Reverend James Lawson. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion, and the support of the John Templeton Foundation, whose vision is to become a global catalyst for discoveries that contribute to human flourishing. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carriet Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Ellis Osborne, and Tim Lauer. And special thanks to Molly Dorman at Vanderbilt University Special Collections, and to the kind folks at Holman United Methodist Church in Los Angeles for their gracious hospitality. Thanks for listening. Let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.
From PRX.